Thank you for joining my video. My name is Bradley, and I'm a Kierkegaard scholar. Søren Kierkegaard was a Danish philosopher. I thought he'd be useful for understanding what's happening in the world today, as we're seeing the world face a pandemic and daily protests in the street. Kierkegaard might be considered today a figure of the alt-right. Kierkegaard carries notions that sound familiar to what we've been hearing here on the left, coming from figures who oppose protests. I found that Kierkegaard wrote in his journal today, this very same day, in June of 1853. I'm citing entries of Kierkegaard's journals and notebooks, NB28, entries 41 through 49. In this journal entry, Kierkegaard is describing Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and he's calling it New Fear and Trembling because it's a parody of a work he published 10 years prior called Fear and Trembling. So this is how Kierkegaard opposes Catholics and says that Catholics are preaching crusades and they're protesting real Christianity by being part of the crusade ideology. And Kierkegaard picks on a specific character called Bernard of Clairvaux because Bernard is known for communicating to the Pope that there's people who have divine superpowers, and Kierkegaard thinks that Luther ended all of this type of superstitious Christianity. And he says that Socrates is a pagan when Bernard is a Christian in today's Christianity or Christendom. Kierkegaard is writing this journal entry because he's trying to recapture this feeling of greatness he had 10 years ago. Kierkegaard is considered a figure of alternative right ideology. This is a way of looking at Kierkegaard that people on the left should use because it aligns with the way Kierkegaard was reading Socrates as a tragic character. Kierkegaard's hero, Luther, is described in the book, in the very first book Kierkegaard publishes, Fear and Trembling. Luther is looked at as having Socratic method. But also in this first book, Kierkegaard is following up on the thesis he wrote in German and Latin, that Abraham is an Old Testament character and is a link between Judaism and Christianity. Eventually he says in this entry that in Christianity, Isaac is actually sacrificed, and the angels bring him back to life, or rather angel brings him back to life. In Judaism, it's only a test. So this is kind of like how today, how we look at Democrats and Republicans and see that they have kind of conflicting, opposing ways to interpret events. So for example, the killing of George Floyd as a protest that has turned into vandalism and looting has drawn interpretations from both the left and right. He's also calling Abraham these right-wing ableist slurs. He calls him half deranged. He says in a voice that was half of that of an obedient subordinate and half that of derangement, Abraham replied once he was sacrificing Isaac. So who does this sound like? This sounds like a Trump follower who calls people on the internet names to own them. Kierkegaard would have been owning the libs on the internet. He's saying Abraham is deranged, but he's saying that as a reflection of the complacent readership of Abraham by the church by Catholics. But what I think is ironic about reading Kierkegaard, especially his journals, is that alt-right Kierkegaard hates the daily press. The demoralizing character of the daily press can also be viewed in this way. In each generation, there scarcely live 10 people who in Socratic fashion fear most of all having an incorrect opinion. But there live 1,000 and millions who are above all afraid of standing alone with an opinion, even if it were the most correct. But when something appears in a newspaper, this eo ipso provides certainty that then there will always be a bunch of people who will hold or express that same view. Ergo, you may very well dare hold that view. In truth, if the daily press, like other businesses, were to hang out a sign, it should have the following inscription: here people are demoralized in the shortest possible time, on the greatest possible scale, for the cheapest possible price. Kierkegaard hates the daily press. He thinks that it prints dogma in Denmark, and it does. This is true because Denmark is under control of the Swedish church, known as Christendom. I think what's most profound about reading Kierkegaard as an alt-right ideological character is that it provides a space of liminality where people on the left can contain Kierkegaard's work and sort of use Kierkegaard against Kierkegaard by looking at some of his words that align with today's rhetoric. So what happens when Kierkegaard is a figure of the right? Do we lose his Socratic method, just dismiss whatever Kierkegaard had to say is just right-wing ideology? The problem is that Kierkegaard doesn't support protests. Protesters are imitators. Catholics, for example, imitate the exemplar as Christ. He says that people who protest wages are seeking a material quality that removes spirit. He thinks that protest is a form of serving the dogma of Christianity. Anybody who's forming a crowd or a protest is deluding themselves, they're deranged, and this is well known of Kierkegaard since he published 10 years before this journal entry, Fear and Trembling. I think Kierkegaard is like your alt-right friend